When he struck a black boy in anger, he thought he could walk away without consequences. But the person watching wasn't just any bystander, and their response shook everyone to the core. The summer sun was setting over the quiet streets of a small suburban town. Families were wrapping up their day, kids riding bikes, and the faint hum of lawnmowers filled the air. Among them was James, a young black boy full of energy and excitement, on his way to the corner store to pick up a snack with the few dollars he had saved from doing chores. James loved this little store. It was where he'd often meet his friends and browse the candy aisle for what felt like hours. But tonight, the store would become the scene of something he could have never anticipated. As James stepped inside, the familiar jingle of the doorbell echoed through the store. He nodded politely to the cashier and headed straight to the aisle with his favorite candy. Unbeknownst to him, a man in his late 40s, dressed in a faded baseball cap and scruffy jeans, was watching him from the corner of the store. His face was tense, his movements sharp as he followed James with his eyes. The man, who the locals knew as Dale, was infamous for his temper and his blatant prejudice. He had always believed people like James didn't belong in his town, and he wasn't shy about expressing it. James, oblivious to Dale's piercing gaze, picked up a candy bar and walked toward the counter. But just as he reached into his pocket for the money, Dale stormed toward him, his voice loud and aggressive. "What do you think you're doing, boy?" Dale barked, his words laced with hostility. James froze, startled. "I'm just buying this," he said softly, holding up the candy bar. Dale scoffed. "You think I don't see what you're up to? Trying to steal something, aren't you?" The cashier, a young woman named Sarah, looked up in alarm. "Sir, he hasn't done anything," she began, but Dale cut her off. "I know his kind," Dale spat, "always looking to take what doesn't belong to them." Before James could respond, Dale's anger boiled over. He grabbed the candy bar out of James's hand and shoved him backward. The boy stumbled, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. The store fell silent as other customers turned to watch the scene unfold. But what Dale didn't know was that someone was watching closely from just outside the store. A man who had seen the entire interaction through the glass door. And this man wasn't going to let Dale get away with his actions. The figure outside stepped into the store, his presence commanding attention. He was tall, with a quiet but undeniable strength in his stance. As he approached Dale, his voice cut through the tension like a knife. "What do you think you're doing?" he said, his tone calm but firm. Dale turned to face him, his bravado faltering slightly. "Mind your business," he snapped. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me when I see a grown man bullying a kid," the newcomer replied, his eyes locking onto Dale's with an intensity that made him take a step back. Dale's face twisted in frustration as the stranger's calm but commanding presence rattled him. The entire store seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. James stood frozen, his candy bar still clenched in his small hand, unsure of what to do. "And who do you think you are?" Dale sneered, trying to regain his bravado. "This boy needs to be taught a lesson." The stranger stepped closer, his gaze steady and unwavering. "The only lesson being taught here is yours," he said, his voice low and firm. "You don't get to bully a kid just because you can. Now step away." Dale hesitated, glancing at the growing number of eyes on him. The cashier, Sarah, finally found her voice. "He's right, Dale. James hasn't done anything wrong. He's a regular customer here. He always pays." "You're taking his side?" Dale snapped, his face turning red. "You don't know what these people are capable of." The stranger clenched his jaw, his patience wearing thin. "Enough," he said sharply. "We all see what you're doing, and it's not going to fly. Leave the boy alone or you'll regret it." Dale's bravado crumbled under the weight of the stranger's words and the judgmental stares of the other customers. Muttering under his breath, he turned to leave, but not before pointing a finger at James. "Watch your back, boy," he growled. As Dale stormed out of the store, the tension in the air began to dissipate. The stranger crouched down to James's level, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. James nodded, though his hands were still shaking. I didn't do anything wrong, he said quietly, his voice trembling. I know, the man replied. You didn't deserve that. Sarah stepped out from behind the counter, her face filled with concern. James, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Dale's always been a troublemaker, but this was too much. The stranger stood up, turning to Sarah. Is this normal around here? People like him harassing kids? Sarah sighed, shaking her head. Dale's been a problem for a long time, but no one's ever stood up to him like that. Thank you for stepping in. The man nodded but kept his focus on James. Do you need a ride home, kid? He asked. I want to make sure you're safe. James hesitated, then nodded again. Thank you, he whispered, his gratitude evident. As they left the store, James looked up at the man and asked, Why did you help me? The man smiled faintly. Because someone once helped me when I needed it, and it's the right thing to do. That night, as James told his parents what had happened, their initial shock turned to gratitude. They couldn't thank the stranger enough for protecting their son, and they vowed to make sure Dale faced consequences for his actions. But what no one realized was that this moment would set off a chain of events that would ripple through the entire town. Word of the incident spread quickly throughout the small town. By morning, almost everyone knew about how Dale had harassed James at the corner store and how the stranger had stepped in to stop him. People were talking, some outraged by Dale's behavior, others inspired by the courage of the man who had defended James. In the following days, James's family worked with community leaders to launch a new initiative called Stand Together. The program focused on promoting kindness, awareness, and accountability, offering workshops and resources to educate people about the impact of discrimination and the importance of allyship. Meanwhile, Dale's actions didn't go unchecked. The footage from the store, paired with witness testimonies, left little room for doubt about his behavior. In court, Dale faced charges of harassment and assault, and the judge made it clear that such actions would not be tolerated. You not only acted out of prejudice, the judge said sternly, but you targeted a child, a defenseless boy who was doing nothing wrong. Your actions have caused harm not just to him, but to this entire community. Dale's sentence included mandatory anger management classes, community service, and a public apology to James and his family. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about ensuring he understood the consequences of his actions and the harm he had caused. The apology took place at a community event organized by Stand Together. The crowd was tense as Dale stepped forward, his usual bravado replaced by visible discomfort. He faced James and his family, his voice unsteady as he spoke. I'm sorry, Dale said, his words hesitant but sincere. What I did was wrong, and I have no excuse. I let my anger and prejudice get the better of me, and I hurt you. I hope you can forgive me. James, standing next to his parents, looked up at Dale. The boy's courage shone as he replied, I forgive you, but you need to do better. No one deserves to be treated like that. The crowd erupted in applause, not for Dale, but for James, for his strength, his grace, and his ability to rise above. As the weeks passed, Stand Together gained momentum. Local businesses began supporting the initiative, offering their spaces for workshops and donating resources. Schools implemented programs to teach children about empathy and respect, fostering a new generation of allies. Caleb, despite his reluctance to be in the spotlight, became an integral part of the movement. He mentored young people, sharing his experiences and encouraging them to stand up for what was right. His quiet strength became a beacon of hope for the community. One day, as Caleb walked through the store where it all began, he noticed James browsing the candy aisle. The boy spotted him and ran over, his face lighting up with a smile. Hey, Mr. Caleb, James said, holding up a candy bar. Guess what? They're letting me help with the Stand Together program at my school. Caleb grinned. That's amazing, James. You're going to make a big difference. James nodded proudly. It's all because of you. You showed me what it means to stand up for others. Caleb crouched down, meeting James's eyes. No, James. You're the one making the difference. You're braver than most adults I know, and you're going to do great things. As Caleb watched James run back to his parents, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. What had started as a moment of instinct, stepping in to defend a boy, had grown into a movement that was changing lives. It was proof that even the smallest acts of courage could spark something far greater. Months turned into years, and the impact of Stand Together was felt far beyond the small town where it all began. The program expanded to neighboring communities, with schools, businesses, and local leaders adopting its principles. What started as a response to one moment of injustice had grown into a widespread movement for empathy, accountability, and unity. James, now a teenager, had become one of the most vocal advocates for the initiative. He often spoke at events, sharing his story with honesty and bravery. "I'll never forget that day," he told an audience at a regional conference. "But what I remember most is how one person stood up for me when no one else did. That taught me that we all have the power to make a difference, no matter how small it might seem." Caleb, though still humble and reluctant about the spotlight, had found himself at the heart of the movement. His actions that day had inspired countless others to take a stand in their own lives. He was invited to speak at events and schools, where his quiet wisdom left a lasting impression on everyone who heard him. During one such event, a young boy approached Caleb with tears in his eyes. "You're my hero," the boy said, clutching a piece of paper with Stand Together logo on it. "Because of you, I stood up to a bully at my school." Caleb smiled warmly, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're the real hero," he said. "It takes courage to stand up for what's right. Never forget that." At the local diner, a group of regulars discussed the event over coffee. "It's about time someone put Dale in his place," one man said, shaking his head. "He's been getting away with this kind of behavior for too long." Across town, James's parents were busy making phone calls. They had decided to take action, determined to ensure that what happened to their son wouldn't happen to anyone else. They contacted the local police department, community leaders, and even a reporter from the town newspaper. Their goal was clear: hold Dale accountable and raise awareness about the harassment their son had faced. Meanwhile, the stranger who had defended James, whose name was Caleb, tried to go about his day quietly. He wasn't looking for recognition or praise. He had only done what he believed was right. But when Sarah, the cashier from the store, found him at the coffee shop, she insisted on thanking him. "Caleb, you didn't just stand up for James. You showed this town what courage looks like," Sarah said, sliding into the seat across from him. "People need to know there are good folks like you out there." Caleb shook his head modestly. "I just did what anyone should do," he said. "That kid didn't deserve what happened to him." "Well, the whole town is talking about it," Sarah replied. "And I think you should talk to the reporter James's parents called. This story could make a real difference." Reluctantly, Caleb agreed to meet with the reporter. A few days later, the story was published with the headline, "Local Hero Stands Up Against Harassment, a Call for Change." The article detailed the incident, praised Caleb's bravery, and highlighted the broader issue of prejudice in the community. The story struck a nerve. Letters poured into the newspaper's office, many expressing support for James and outrage at Dale's behavior. Some shared their own experiences of discrimination, while others asked how they could help create a safer, more inclusive town. At the same time, the article drew attention from the local authorities. The police opened an investigation into Dale's actions, reviewing security footage from the store and speaking with witnesses. Dale's history of aggressive behavior didn't help his case, and it wasn't long before he was summoned to court to answer for his actions. James's parents were determined to use this moment to push for change. They organized a town hall meeting, inviting community members to discuss how to address harassment and create a safer environment for everyone. Caleb was reluctant to attend at first, but James's parents insisted he come as a guest of honor. When the night of the meeting arrived, the community center was packed. People of all ages and backgrounds filled the seats, their expressions a mix of determination and hope. James and his family sat in the front row with Caleb beside them. James's mother stood up to address the crowd. "What happened to my son was heartbreaking," she began, her voice steady but emotional. "No child should have to face harassment because of the color of their skin. But thanks to Caleb's bravery, My son knows he's not alone." The crowd erupted in applause, and Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his seat. When the applause died down, he stood and spoke. "I didn't step in for recognition," Caleb said, his voice calm and sincere. "I stepped in because it was the right thing to do. We can't just stand by and watch injustice happen. If we want this town to change, it starts with us, standing up for what's right every single time." The town hall meeting became a turning point for the community. Caleb's words resonated deeply, inspiring conversations about standing up against prejudice and creating a safer, more inclusive environment. People who had been silent about their own experiences started to speak up, and for the first time, it felt like change was possible. Back in their hometown, James's family continued to lead the charge, ensuring that Stand Together remained a driving force for change. The local grocery store where the incident occurred became a symbol of progress. Under new management, the store partnered with the program to host community events and serve as a safe space for everyone. Even Dale's life took a turn. After completing his sentence and participating in the Stand Together workshops, he became one of its unlikely advocates. Humbled and transformed, he often spoke about his own mistakes and the lessons he had learned. "If someone like me can change," Dale told a crowd at a town event, "then there's hope for anyone." The town, once divided by unspoken prejudices, had become a model of unity. Neighbors who once kept to themselves now worked together, building a community that celebrated its diversity and supported one another. It wasn't perfect, change never is, but the progress was undeniable. One sunny afternoon, Caleb and James sat together on a bench overlooking the park where many of the Stand Together events were now held. The laughter of children and the buzz of families enjoying the day filled the air. "You know, James," Caleb said, glancing at the boy who had grown into a confident young leader, "you've taught me just as much as I've taught you. Seeing you take this moment and turn it into something so powerful, it's inspiring." James smiled, his eyes bright with determination. "We did it together, and it's not over yet." Caleb nodded, his heart full. "No, it's not. And that's the best part." As the sun set, casting golden hues over the town, it was clear that the seeds of kindness and courage planted on that fateful day had grown into something extraordinary, a testament to the power of standing together against injustice and choosing to make a difference, no matter how small.